Imagine sitting in front of your screen, watching your portfolio bleed out in real time, not by 10%, not by 20, but by more than 70%. The stock you believed in, the company you spent months researching, the position you opened with real money, money you worked for, money you could not afford to lose, is now worth less than a quarter of what you paid for it. And every single person around you, every analyst, every financial blogger, every guy at the office who talks about stocks like he invented the market, is looking at you with that same expression. You know the one. That mix of pity and "I told you so" that cuts deeper than any market crash ever could. That is exactly where thousands of investors found themselves with Palantir. The year was 2022. The stock had cratered from $23 all the way down to $6. $6. A company built over nearly 2 decades, a company that processed intelligence data for the United States government, a company whose technology was literally used to hunt down the most dangerous people on the planet. And Wall Street had decided it was worthless. The headlines were brutal. Palantir is a speculative disaster. Why you should dump this stock before it goes to zero. The Palantir dream is dead. These were not fringe bloggers. These were respected financial publications with millions of readers, and they were all singing the exact same song. Get out while you still can. And most people listened. Of course they did, because that is what humans do when the pain becomes unbearable. When your account is down 70% and every credible voice in the room is screaming sell, the rational thing, the thing your brain is literally wired to do, is to cut the loss and walk away. Preserve what little is left. Protect yourself. Move on. But there was a different kind of investor sitting in that same moment. Not smarter, necessarily. Not richer. Not someone with access to secret information or a hedge fund terminal with real-time data feeds. Just someone who understood something that the crowd had forgotten. Someone who looked at the same headlines, the same charts, the same analyst reports, and read them completely differently. While the mainstream financial media was running its obituary on Palantir, something else was quietly happening beneath the surface. Institutional investors, the massive funds, the pension managers, the people who move billions of dollars with a single decision, were not panicking. They were accumulating, slowly, methodically, invisibly, adding shares every single week while retail investors were racing each other to the exit. This is the part nobody talks about. Not because it is a secret, because it is boring until it is not. Because it happens slowly, then all at once. Because by the time the average person notices what happened, the opportunity is already 300% in the rearview mirror. Within 3 years of that $6 low, Palantir would deliver investors a gain of over 2,700%. Not 200, not 500, 2,700%. That means every $10,000 left in that position at the bottom turned into $280,000, but only for the people who stayed, only for the people who did not flinch when the pain was at its absolute worst. Now think about Intel. Think about a company that was once the undisputed king of semiconductors, the company that literally put a chip inside every computer on the planet for 2 decades straight. By 2023, the narrative had completely collapsed. Analysts were calling it a zombie, a relic, a company stuck in the past while the rest of the industry had moved on without it. Quarterly losses were piling up. Market share was evaporating. The headlines read like a slow-motion funeral. Intel is no longer relevant. The giant has fallen. People who had held Intel for years were exhausted, embarrassed, and done. And then there was Seagate, a hard drive manufacturer in an era when everyone said hard drives were obsolete. In a world of cloud storage and flash memory, Seagate looked like someone trying to sell a fax machine in 2024. Dinosaur. That was the word analysts actually used. An industry dinosaur waiting for extinction. Here is the question I want you to sit with right now. Not a theoretical question, a personal one. If you had owned any of these stocks at the absolute bottom, when the losses were real, when the embarrassment was public, when every trusted voice around you was urging you to walk away, what would you have done? Be honest with yourself, because your answer to that question is not just about investing. It is about everything that separates the people who build real wealth from the people who spend their whole lives almost getting there. What exactly is the difference between the investor who held Palantir at $6 and the one who sold? Because it was not information. Both of them had access to the same data. Both of them read the same news. Both of them felt the same fear. So what was it? What is the one thing that turns a catastrophic loss into a 2,700% return? That is exactly what we are going to break down. And by the time this is over, you are never going to look at a falling stock or a falling market the same way again. Every single time a great company has been left for dead, the story has ended the same way. Not because the market is fair, not because good businesses always win in the end, but because there is a machine running underneath all of it. A machine most people never see, never understand, and never learn to use in their favor. And today, I am going to show you exactly how it works. Think of institutional capital, the big pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, the multi-billion-dollar asset managers, as an enormous cargo ship. We are talking about something so massive that it cannot just turn on a dime. When one of these funds decides to buy a position in a company, they cannot just click a button and own $1 billion worth of stock by Friday afternoon. It takes weeks, sometimes months. They have to accumulate slowly, carefully, quietly, because if the market figures out what they are doing too early, the price moves against them before they are even halfway done. So they need cover, they need chaos, they need everyone else looking the other way. And what creates that perfect cover? Bad news, panic, analysts screaming sell, retail investors flooding the exit doors all at once. The louder the noise, the better the conditions for the big money to do its work in silence. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is mechanics. This is how capital has moved through markets for over 100 years, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So, how do you read the signal before the ship has already sailed? There are four things, four specific conditions, that appear together every single time one of these setups is real. Think of them as clues at a crime scene. Individually, each one means almost nothing. Together, they tell you exactly what is about to happen. The first clue is the narrative collapse. This is the moment when the mainstream story about a company goes from complicated to catastrophic. Not just bad earnings, total abandonment. The kind of coverage where financial media stops asking whether the company can recover and starts asking who will buy the wreckage. When the story shifts from doubt to obituary, that is the first clue on the table. The second clue is the price disconnection. The stock has fallen so far, so fast, that it no longer reflects the actual underlying business. The assets are real. The revenue is real. The customers are real. But the price is being set by fear, not by fundamentals. This gap between what a business is actually worth and what the market is pricing it at is where the opportunity lives. The third clue is the institutional footprint. Even while retail investors are selling in panic, the volume data tells a different story. Shares are being absorbed. The sell-off is not causing the price to freefall. It is being caught quietly by buyers who do not show up on the evening news. The cargo ship has started its slow, invisible turn. The fourth clue is the catalyst on the horizon. There is something coming. A contract, a regulatory shift, a technology inflection point, an earnings quarter that will force the market to completely reprice its assumptions. It does not have to be imminent, but it has to be real, and it has to be the kind of thing that cannot be ignored once it arrives. Now, here is where most people get this completely wrong, and where I need to stop for a moment, because this mistake has cost ordinary investors more money than almost anything else I can point to. Believing in a company's story and holding the right position are two completely different things. Let me show you exactly why that distinction matters. PayPal, 2021. The stock was trading at $310. The growth narrative was everywhere. Digital payments, the future of money, a platform with hundreds of millions of users. Investors believed in it deeply, and then the stock began to fall, and fall, and fall, all the way down to $46, a drop of over 85% from peak to trough. Now, was PayPal a broken business? No. Was the long-term story wrong? Not entirely, but did it meet the four conditions we just talked about? Not in that window. The institutional footprint was not there. The price disconnection was real, but the catalyst was not visible. And investors who confused emotional conviction with strategic positioning paid an enormous price for that confusion. This is the brutal truth that no financial influencer wants to say out loud. The market does not care how much you believe in something. It does not reward loyalty. It does not compensate you for pain endured. The only thing that matters is whether the four conditions are aligned, and whether you have the patience to wait for the machine to finish doing its work. The media, the analysts, the talking heads on financial television, they are not your informants. They are not there to help you make money. Understand what they actually are. They are the mechanism that creates cheap prices for the people who already know what is coming. Every sell headline on a fundamentally strong business is not a warning. It is an invitation, but only if you know how to read it. And the most dangerous investor is not the one who ignores the news entirely. It is the one who reads the news and reacts to the surface of it, without understanding what is happening 3 layers underneath. That investor will sell Palantir at $6. That investor will dump Intel at the exact bottom. That investor will spend years watching from the sidelines while the cargo ship they watch turn around delivers everyone else to the other side. The pattern is not random. It has repeated itself across decades, across industries, across every single economic cycle the modern market has ever produced. And right now, in 2025, it is repeating again. But before I show you exactly where, I need to take you back through history one more time. Because if you are still not completely convinced that this is real, 3 stories are about to change that. Permanently. Let me take you back to a moment that most people in finance would rather forget. The year is 2022. Palantir Technologies has just reported another quarter of losses. The stock is sitting at $6 and change. On financial Twitter, on Reddit, on every mainstream investing platform, the verdict is unanimous. This company is finished. And the thing that makes this moment so painful, so genuinely gut-wrenching for the people who lived through it, is that Palantir was not some startup that had never delivered anything real. This was a company that had spent nearly 20 years building technology. 20 years. That is not a pitch deck. That is not a founder with a dream and a slide presentation. That is 2 decades of engineers, mathematicians, and data scientists building something from the ground up. The company was founded in 2003. For most of its early existence, its only real customer was the United States government, intelligence agencies, defense contractors, the kind of clients who do not exactly make for exciting press releases. While Silicon Valley was celebrating consumer apps and social media platforms that could be explained in a single sentence, Palantir was doing work that could barely be described in public. Classified work, invisible work, the kind of work that does not generate headlines until someone tells you that the technology helped track down one of the most wanted men in the world. When Palantir went public in 2020, it briefly caught fire. The stock hit $23. Retail investors poured in. The narrative was intoxicating. A secretive data company, a government backbone, now opening itself up to the public market. And then the market turned. Tech sold off hard. Growth stocks got absolutely destroyed. And Palantir, with its complicated business model and its stubborn refusal to fit into a clean category, fell harder than almost anything else. $6, down over 70% from where it had gone public. Down over 70% from where thousands of retail investors had bought in with real money and real hope. The analysts did not soften the blow. Price targets were slashed. Coverage was dropped entirely by some firms. The message from Wall Street was clear. Move on. There is nothing left here worth waiting for. And the overwhelming majority of investors did exactly that. They sold. They absorbed the loss. They moved their money somewhere else and tried not to think about it. But here is what was happening at exactly that same moment, completely invisible to the people who were panic selling. Institutional buyers were stepping in, quietly, methodically. The four conditions were all present at once: narrative collapse, price disconnection, institutional footprint, and a catalyst on the horizon in the form of artificial intelligence contracts that were not yet public knowledge. The cargo ship had begun its turn, and almost nobody noticed. Fast forward to 2025. Palantir is no longer a punchline. It is one of the defining technology companies of the artificial intelligence era. Its government contracts have expanded massively. Its commercial division has exploded. The stock has delivered a gain of over 2,700% from that $6 low. 2,700%. The people who held through the pain, who ignored the obituaries, who understood that the four conditions were aligned, those people did not just make money, they changed their financial lives entirely. Now let me tell you a different kind of story, because Palantir is a story about patience rewarded after a long fall. But 2025 gave us something different, something faster, something that shocked even the people who were paying attention. CoreWeave went public in March of 2025 at $40 per share. Wall Street was skeptical from day one. The IPO market was difficult. The stock barely moved in its first weeks of trading. Financial media described the debut as underwhelming. Analysts were cautious. The general consensus was that CoreWeave was an interesting company in an exciting space, but the valuation was hard to justify, and the path to profitability was unclear. It sat there, quiet, almost ignored, trading in a narrow range while the rest of the market moved around it. Here is what most people did not fully grasp about what CoreWeave actually was. This was not a software company. This was not another AI startup with a chatbot and a subscription model. CoreWeave had built the physical infrastructure that artificial intelligence runs on. Massive data centers packed with the most powerful graphics processing units on the planet, rented out to the companies building the next generation of AI systems. If artificial intelligence is the electricity of the 21st century. CoreWeave was building the power plants. And not just any power plants. Nvidia, the single most important hardware company in the entire AI supply chain, had invested directly in CoreWeave. Think about what that means. The company making the engines had placed a significant bet on the company building the roads those engines would run on. When CoreWeave reported its first earnings as a public company, the market had to completely reprice everything it thought it knew. Revenue was not just growing, it was accelerating in a way that forced even the most skeptical analysts to rethink their models. The stock went from its quiet $40 range and exploded past $90, more than 100% gain for anyone who had understood what they were looking at during those quiet early weeks when everyone else was shrugging and moving on. This is the pattern. This is always the pattern. The opportunity does not announce itself. It does not come with a headline that says, "Buy here." It comes disguised as something boring, something confusing, something that the crowd has already decided is not worth their attention. And then there is Intel. If Palantir is a story about patience and CoreWeave is a story about speed, then Intel is a story about resurrection. And it is the most emotionally brutal of the three, because Intel was not an unknown company that people had overlooked. Intel was an institution, a legend, a name that had been synonymous with computing power for so long that its logo had been burned into the consciousness of an entire generation of technology users. By 2023, that legacy had become a liability in the eyes of the market. Intel had missed the shift to mobile chips. It had fallen behind Taiwan Semiconductor in manufacturing. It had fumbled its response to AMD's resurgence. Quarter after quarter of disappointing results. Billions of dollars in losses. The CEO making difficult public statements about restructuring, layoffs, and strategic pivots that the market interpreted as desperation rather than direction. Analysts who had covered the company for decades were writing it off. Intel is no longer relevant. That was not a blog post from some random corner of the internet. That was the consensus of professional financial analysis. And while that consensus was being published, distributed, and consumed by millions of retail investors who then made the completely rational decision to sell or avoid the stock entirely, the institutional footprint was building. The four conditions were lining up with almost textbook precision. The narrative had collapsed completely. The price had disconnected dramatically from the replacement value of Intel's physical assets alone, never mind its intellectual property and its customer relationships. The institutional accumulation was visible in the volume data for anyone who knew where to look. And the catalyst was the United States government's push to reshore semiconductor manufacturing onto American soil, a political and economic force that made Intel's domestic manufacturing capacity suddenly, urgently strategic in a way it had not been in 20 years. The result was a gain that crossed 500% for investors who held through the darkest part of the story. 500%. Not because Intel became the company it was in its prime, but because the price had been driven so far below reality by fear and narrative that even a partial recovery represented an extraordinary return for anyone who had stayed in their seat. 3 stories, 3 different timelines, 3 completely different industries, and the same 4 conditions running underneath all of them, like a current that most people never feel until it is already carrying someone else downstream. Narrative collapse, price disconnection, institutional footprint, catalyst on the horizon. The question is not whether this pattern is real. We have just watched it play out across multiple decades, multiple market cycles, and multiple categories of business. The question, the only question that matters right now, is whether you can recognize it when you are standing in the middle of it. Because right now, in this moment, I am looking at three companies where every single one of those conditions is present, and the window is not going to stay open forever. History does not repeat itself perfectly, but it rhymes with an accuracy that should make every serious investor stop and pay very close attention right now, because I have spent the last several months mapping the four conditions across hundreds of companies in the current market. And what I found was not what I expected. I expected to find one or two setups worth watching. Instead, I found three situations where the pattern is so clean, so complete, so identical to what I showed you in the Palantir and Intel's stories, that ignoring them would be the same kind of mistake that cost people their best financial opportunity of the last decade. Let me be direct with you. The next 2 years are not going to look like the last 2 years. The macro environment is shifting in ways that most people are not positioned for. Inflation has permanently repriced the cost of everything. Interest rates have fundamentally changed the math on how ordinary Americans build and protect wealth. The geopolitical landscape has fractured in ways that are redirecting trillions of dollars of capital into sectors that were completely ignored 12 months ago. And in the middle of all of that disruption, three companies are sitting at exactly the kind of inflection point that has produced the most extraordinary returns in modern market history. The first one is Fortinet. If you have not heard that name before, write it down. Fortinet is a cybersecurity company, and before you tell me that cybersecurity sounds boring, let me give you a single number that will change your mind immediately. In 2023 alone, the global cost of cybercrime crossed $8 trillion. $8 trillion. That is larger than the entire economy of Japan. And that number is not going down. It is accelerating, because artificial intelligence has fundamentally transformed what a cyber attack looks like. The hacker of 2015 was a talented individual working through the night with custom tools and a lot of patience. The attacker of 2025 is running automated AI systems that can probe millions of vulnerabilities simultaneously, learn from every failed attempt in real time, and generate entirely new attack methods faster than any human security team can respond to them. AI has made the threat roughly 10 times more dangerous in the span of 3 years, and corporate and government cybersecurity budgets are being forced to respond. We are talking about budgets that are doubling, in some cases tripling, as organizations that never prioritize security suddenly realize they have no choice. So, where is Fortinet's stock? It is sitting approximately 35% below its peak, 35% below its all-time high, in a market where the underlying demand for its product is growing faster than almost any other category in technology. The narrative around the stock has been negative. Slower growth in certain segments, pricing pressure, concerns about competition. The same kind of surface-level noise that surrounded Palantir at $6. And underneath that noise, the institutional footprint is building. Large funds have been quietly increasing their positions over the last several quarters. The price disconnection between what Fortinet is actually worth as a business and what the market is currently pricing it at is as wide as it has been in years. The catalyst is not a mystery. It is the next major cyber attack on critical infrastructure, which history tells us is not a question of if, but when, and which will force every boardroom in America to sign off on dramatically higher security spending the following morning. The second company is one that almost nobody in the mainstream financial conversation is talking about, and the reason nobody is talking about it is exactly why it deserves your attention. Compass Minerals. The stock has fallen from nearly $100 to around $27, a drop of almost 73%. On the surface, this looks like a company in serious trouble. The headlines have been negative. There have been operational challenges, management transitions, earnings disappointments. All of the conditions for maximum retail investor despair are present. But here is what those headlines are not telling you. Compass Minerals sits on top of physical assets that cannot be replicated. Not by a competitor with more capital, not by a technology startup with a better algorithm, not by any force in the market other than geological time. We are talking about salt mines and mineral deposits that took millions of years to form, that exist in specific locations that cannot be moved or manufactured, and that supply essential inputs to agriculture and food production across North America. Food security is not an abstract concept anymore. It is a geopolitical weapon. It is a domestic policy priority. It is something that governments are now willing to spend enormous amounts of money to protect and control. And Compass Minerals, sitting at $27 with assets on its balance sheet that a replacement cost analysis would value at several multiples of its current stock price, is one of the most asymmetric physical asset opportunities in the current market. Think about what that means in plain terms. You cannot 3D print a salt mine. You cannot build an app that replaces potassium sulfate. You cannot train an AI model to manufacture magnesium chloride out of thin air. These are physical, irreplaceable, essential resources. And the company that owns them is currently being priced by the market as if it is a broken technology startup instead of what it actually is, a toll booth on a road that the global food supply chain cannot reroute around. The institutional footprint is present. The catalyst is the global food security conversation that is moving from academic papers into government policy with increasing urgency. And the price disconnection is frankly one of the widest I have seen in a resource company in the last 15 years. The third company requires me to ask you a question first. Every time someone announces a new semiconductor fabrication plant, every time Taiwan Semiconductor, Samsung, or Intel breaks ground on a new chip factory anywhere in the world, what do they need before they can make a single chip? They need equipment, specialized, extraordinarily precise, impossibly complex equipment that only a handful of companies on Earth know how to build. MKS Instruments is one of those companies. They make the tools that the factories use to make the chips, not the flashy end product, not the consumer-facing technology. The industrial plumbing, the measurement systems, the process control equipment that sits inside every advanced semiconductor manufacturing facility on the planet and makes it possible to produce chips at the nanoscale tolerances that modern computing requires. The semiconductor manufacturing build-out that is currently underway globally is the largest industrial investment cycle in the history of the technology sector. The United States government alone has committed to hundreds of billions of dollars in domestic chip manufacturing through the CHIPS Act. Europe has its own equivalent program. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Every major economy on Earth is racing to build or expand semiconductor manufacturing capacity because the last several years have taught every government on the planet that depending on a single geographic region for your chip supply is a national security vulnerability they cannot afford to ignore. Every single one of those new factories needs MKS Instruments equipment. There is no workaround. There is no substitute. You cannot build an advanced semiconductor fabrication plant in Arizona or Ohio or Germany and choose not to buy from the companies that make the specialized process equipment those plants require. MKS is not optional. It is infrastructure. and its stock has been under significant pressure, weighed down by cyclical concerns about the chip industry's near-term demand fluctuations, at exactly the moment when the structural, multi-decade build-out of global semiconductor manufacturing is just beginning to accelerate. The four conditions are present for all three of these companies simultaneously. Narrative that has collapsed or turned deeply negative. Price that has disconnected from underlying business value. Institutional footprint beginning to build in the volume data. And catalysts, cybersecurity spending acceleration, global food security policy, semiconductor manufacturing expansion, that are not speculative. They are already funded, already legislated, already underway. The only question is timing. And timing, as we have established, is not something the crowd gets right. The crowd gets it wrong in exactly the same direction every single time. They see the catalyst after the price has already moved, and they spend the next 2 years explaining to themselves why they were almost there. I want you to understand something about the moment we are living in right now. The combination of forces bearing down on the American economy, persistent inflation, geopolitical instability, the fastest technological transformation in human history, a government debt trajectory that no serious economist believes is sustainable, is not creating a crisis for everyone equally. It never does. What it is creating is the widest divergence between people who understand how to position themselves and people who do not that we have seen since 2008. The middle path, keep your money in a savings account, trust that your employer's 401k allocation is optimized for what is coming. Assume that the next decade will look like the last one. That path is not safe. It is just a slower version of falling behind. The companies I just described to you are not lottery tickets. They are not speculative bets on technologies that may never materialize. They are businesses with real assets, real revenue, real customers, and real competitive positions in sectors that the next decade is going to make dramatically more valuable than the current market price suggests. The pain in their stock prices is real. The uncertainty is real. The negative headlines are real. And if you have been paying attention to everything I have shown you today, you know exactly what real pain and real negative headlines have historically meant for investors who understood what was actually happening underneath the noise. But understanding the pattern and acting on it are two completely different things. And that gap, that distance between knowledge and action, is where most investors lose the game entirely. Not because they did not have the information, because of something much harder to fix than information. Something that no spreadsheet can solve, no analyst report can address, and no financial advisor can give you in a portfolio review. And that is exactly what I need to talk to you about right now, because we have arrived at the real conversation, the one that determines everything. Let me ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not to me, but to yourself, right now, in this moment. If you had bought Palantir at $20 when it first went public, and then watched it fall to 18, then 14, then 10, then 8, then $6, would you have held, with your real money, with your real savings, with your family watching your investment account lose 70% of its value while every financial publication you respected was telling you the company was finished? Would you have held? Most people, if they are being truly honest, would say no. And there is no shame in that answer. That is not a character flaw. That is biology. The human brain is not wired to sit calmly inside a 70% loss while the people around you are screaming that the house is burning down. Every instinct you have, every survival mechanism built into you over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution is telling you to run, to get out, to stop the bleeding, and preserve what little you have left. The pain of losing money is psychologically approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This is not a theory. This has been proven in research studies across dozens of countries and cultures. Losing hurts more than winning feels good, and the market, whether by design or by accident, exploits that asymmetry with almost perfect efficiency every single time. This is why the investor who held Palantir at $6 is not a different species from the one who sold. They are not smarter. They did not have better information. They were not immune to the fear. What they had was something that cannot be downloaded, cannot be purchased, and cannot be borrowed from someone else. They had a framework that made the fear legible. They understood what the fear was telling them, and more importantly, what it was not telling them. They could look at the narrative collapse, the price disconnection, the institutional footprint, the catalyst on the horizon, and recognize that the fear in the market was not a signal about the future of the business. It was a signal about the psychology of the crowd. And the crowd, as history has demonstrated without a single exception, is wrong at the exact moments that matter most. Think about what that investor felt in the fall of 2022. Think about Thanksgiving dinner with the family, someone asking how the investments are going, and having to explain that you are still holding a stock that is down 70%, and no, you are not selling it, and yes, you have read the articles, and no, you do not think the analysts are right. Think about checking your portfolio on a Monday morning and watching another 2% disappear. Think about the colleague at work who sold his Palantir position at $12 and is now quietly pleased with himself for cutting his losses. Think about all of that, and then tell me that what separated the people who made 2,700% from the people who did not was information. It was not information. It was never information. It was the ability to hold a position that felt catastrophically wrong because a deeper understanding told them it was not. And here is where we arrive at the hardest truth of everything I have said today. The opportunity I just described to you, Fortinet sitting 35% below its peak while cybersecurity budgets double, Compass Minerals at $27 sitting on top of irreplaceable physical assets, MKS Instruments priced as a cyclical disappointment while the largest semiconductor build-out in history gathers speed. That opportunity is available to you right now. The information exists. The pattern is visible. The four conditions are present. Nothing I have told you today is hidden behind a paywall or locked inside a proprietary database. It is all out there, in public filings, in volume data, in government policy documents, in earnings call transcripts that anyone can read. So why will the majority of people who watch this video not act on it? Not because they do not understand it. By this point, you understand it. Because when Fortinet drops another 10% next month on a disappointing earnings guidance revision, and the headlines say cybersecurity sector faces headwinds, and your portfolio is showing a red number next to the position, your brain is going to tell you that you made a mistake. It is going to replay every negative headline it has stored. It is going to remind you of every investment that felt obvious and turned into a loss. It is going to generate a very compelling, very rational-sounding argument for why this time is different, why the pattern does not apply here, why the smart move is to wait until things stabilize. That voice is not your ally. That voice is the mechanism that transfers wealth from the people who feel the fear and act on it to the people who feel the exact same fear and do not. The cargo ship does not wait for you to feel comfortable. It does not pause its turn while you work through your hesitation. It moves on a schedule set by capital flows and business fundamentals and geopolitical forces that operate completely independently of how you are feeling on any given Tuesday afternoon. I want to bring you back to where we started. That investor, the one sitting in front of the screen, watching Palantir bleed from $23 down to $6, getting told by everyone around him to sell, feeling the weight of a 70% loss pressing down on every financial decision in his life. That investor is sitting at a kitchen table right now. Not metaphorically. Somewhere in America, right now, there is a person sitting at a kitchen table, looking at a position in a company that the market has decided is finished. And the entire architecture of financial media, social opinion, and human psychology is aligned to push that person toward the exit at the exact moment they should be sitting still. The difference between the life that person has in 3 years and the life they have if they sell tomorrow is not knowledge. It is not access. It is not luck. It is one thing and only one thing: the discipline to hold a correct position through incorrect feeling circumstances, the discipline to let the evidence outweigh the emotion, the discipline to understand that maximum pain and maximum opportunity are not opposites in the financial markets. They are, with a consistency that should terrify anyone who has ever panic sold, the exact same moment. So here is where I leave you. Not with a summary, not with a list of action items, not with a reassuring conclusion that ties everything together neatly. I am going to leave you with the only question that actually matters after everything you have heard today. The pattern is real. The 3 companies are real. The opportunity is sitting in front of you right now with the same clarity it sat in front of the people who turned $10,000 into $280,000 with Palantir. You have the framework. You have the historical evidence. You have the 4 conditions mapped out in real time against companies that fit them almost perfectly. The question is not whether the opportunity exists. It does. The question is not whether the pattern will repeat. It will. The only question, the one that separates every version of your financial future from every other version, is whether you have enough cold-blooded, evidence-based, fear-resistant discipline to not get in your own way when it matters most. Because the market is not going to wait for you to feel ready. It never has. And the next 2,700% is already happening somewhere, right now, in a stock that the crowd has already decided is not worth their time. The only question is whether you are the one holding it.